Hey everyone, and welcome to this, my first of two videos on the Canon AE-1 Program video manual. We're going to remake a very old video manual here, go through everything about this camera. This first video, we're going to talk about the layout and everything. The second video, we will talk about all of the functions. If you are someone who learns well by having other materials, I also have a paperback and a Kindle ebook version of most everything of what we're going to talk, actually everything that we're going to talk about in this video, I think, as well as a couple of additional points go into those books. And there are some links in the video's description if you would like to check those out. So without further ado, let's get going. The Canon AE-1 Program is a 35mm interchangeable lens SLR. What does that mean? It means that it can take any 35mm film and that the lenses on it can be removed and another one can be put on at any time when you're not taking a photo without messing up your images. You would not want to change lenses on a camera when you're taking a photo. Anyway, it uses a center-weighted meter which has nearly identical sensitivity on all lenses. Okay, what does that mean? A center-weighted meter takes all of the light in the scene. Let's imagine that what you're looking at right now is what's in your viewfinder. The center-weighted meter would see all of this light, and then what's in the middle, an area like about this, would provide, I couldn't find the exact breakdown, but something like 60% to 75%, somewhere in that range of the metering information, and then everything else around it would provide the balance. The second part of that is that it's nearly identical on all lenses, means that the center-weighted meter on this camera is designed that if you put an 18mm lens on it, you'll get roughly the same meter accuracy as if you put a 500mm lens on it. And that, when this camera came out, was not universally true of center-weighted lenses. I'm sorry, center-weighted meters. The camera provides you shutter speeds of bulb 2 seconds to 1/1000th of a second on the fast side, and program. We'll talk about all of this in the second video. The viewfinder has 0.86x magnification and 93.5% frame coverage. Oh, I have film in here. So what that means is, let's imagine that what you're looking at right now is what's going to be on your film. What you would see in the viewfinder would be 86% the size of what you're looking at what's going to reach your film. So the viewfinder shrinks the scene just a little bit before it reaches your eye. 93.5% frame coverage means that if this is what's on the film, then you're going to lose a little bit of image off each of the sides and the top and the bottom in your viewfinder that will be on the film. The advantage to that is that if you have something a little bit cockeyed, you can crop it in post and still get the majority of your subject in the frame if you have filled up the frame in your viewfinder with your subject. So, nice advantage to that. The Canon AE-1 Program has interchangeable focusing screens. If you look inside your shutter box right here, that thing right there is the focusing screen. In the second video, I'm going to show you how to swap it out the correct and proper way. So there were three different focusing screen options. The default was what's in this camera right now, which you might be able to see on the mirror right there as a split prism focusing screen. At the time that this camera came out, this was the brightest focusing screen that Canon made. The flash sync on this camera is 1/60th of a second, which Canon has marked with that little lightning bolt or flash symbol, actually technically, right there to remind you that that is the fastest shutter speed at which you can use a flash. We'll talk about why that is in the second video. The Canon AE-1 Program improved upon the AE-1, the original version, in terms of, as of this video's recording, this is accurate by the way, the electronic component quality and longevity. AE-1s have, over the past few years, had an increasing failure rate, and AE-1s, the originals, which have serial numbers of less than 1 million, have failed at a very high rate in the last 3 to 5 years. The AE-1 Program had better electronics, and over the last 3 to 5 years, when I was actively inspecting and fixing and reselling these had a much lower failure rate of the electronics. This was also an improvement over the AE-1 because it had a removable focusing screen. It adds program mode. It's a lighter camera to carry around. The film speed changing interface, which we'll see in the second video, how to use it, is easier to use than on the AE-1, and it also has a nicer and easier to use depth of field preview lever versus the AE-1. So that's just a series of different improvements over the original model. It's a downgrade from the AE-1 in a few different ways. A key one is that the base plate is plastic and not metal. On the AE-1, the base plate, which is this part right here, is made of metal. I've seen a number of AE-1 programs over the years where the base plate has holes or cracks or things like that in it from it being either dropped or set down way too hard. A lot of them have cracks stemming from the corners. With an AE-1, it just kind of gets a little bit of a ding. The advanced lever is a downgrade from the AE-1 in that it's mostly plastic. These have broken at a very slightly higher rate than the AE-1s over the years. Not meaningfully higher, but very slightly. Also, in the viewfinder of this, the AE-1 program uses an LED-based light meter readout versus the AE-1's needle system. And so while it's easier to read the light meter on the AE-1 program in the dark, the LEDs are not perfect, and with time they will burn out, or the electronics that control them, the wiring, can also fail. So there's a couple of things like that. Also, the AE-1s, like the A1, which used the PX28 battery, the later versions of those, of the cameras using that, can sometimes suffer capacitor drain. The AE-1 original has this issue as well, but capacitor drain is where if you leave a brand new PX28 battery in the camera and you come back a day or two later and it's no longer working and the battery is dead, it's because a capacitor is faulty and it's draining the battery rapidly. I've seen that happen with a number of AE-1 program, and A1 bodies. So you can still use the camera, you just have to take the battery out at the end of the day. One other nice improvement on this over the AE-1 is the ergonomics. This grip especially is very nice to hold. It makes it easy to carry the AE-1 program around and hold it steadily for photos. The target market for the AE-1 program was the mid-range camera user. This is one of the cameras which is responsible for opening up SLR photography to many people, and it also had advanced features in a very user-friendly body. So that's how we know it was designed for people who were sort of a mid-level, in that it has advanced features, but also not professional or super high-end because it's very user-friendly and user-accessible. The A1, which was a step above this, was much more complex and would also have been a suitable professional photographer backup body. I don't think that professional photographers were reaching for the AE-1 program as a backup camera. This was made by Canon in Japan from 1981 to 96. It was preceded, as we said, by the AE-1, and it was followed by the T70 in terms of the T70 occupying the same tier as this camera in Canon's lineup. So now, as we do, we're going to go through all of the camera's features, and in the second video we'll talk about what all of them are. But first, let me take this film out. Okay. Technically, on the front of the cameras, right here, we have these two strap lugs where you would connect a couple of split rings and then you could connect your camera strap to your camera. Here on this assembly right here is your film rewind assembly. This is the film rewind lever that you can pop out to rewind your film. This is your film back release knob, and we'll see how to use that in just a second to open up the back of the camera. This is your ISO setting unlock button, and this up here right now on the front of my camera, may be in a different position on yours, is the ISO selection dial, and on the back is the ISO readout. So to change the ISO, you just push the silver button down and adjust this lever here until you get to the ISO you would like to use. Film plane indicator, which you can use to take very precise measurements for things like photomicroscopy. Battery check button. Serial number. Up here, behind this cover, we we have the flash hot shoe. This cover is what we'll use to get into change the battery in a little bit. And these are good to have on your camera if you can get one. Little black line here is your shutter speed index, which indicates which shutter speed you have selected. This dial right here is the shutter speed selection dial. Frame count window, shutter release button right here, film advance lever right here, which also rearms the shutter when you use it. A for active, L for lock, S for 10-second self-timer. So when you hit the self-timer button, camera's going to beep a bunch, and then after 10 seconds it's going to take a photo with whatever settings you have dialed in. On the camera's front, here we have the grip, which we will remove the grip to change the battery. Behind it we have the battery door here. I'm going to take the lens off for a second and we can see the lens mount. The lens mounting index up here underneath the manufacturer name. Over here on this side, we have on top here the auto exposure lock switch. So for this one, what you can do is you can push this down, and let's say you're in program mode with the lens set to your green A so that the camera will automatically select your aperture. If you hold this down, you lock the exposure in. So for instance, how is this useful? Let's say you're sitting under the shade at a beach and under like an umbrella. And you want to take a photo of the person you're with. Well, if they're in front of you and the beach is behind them and it's very bright, your light meter is going to meter off of the brightness of the beach, and the person you're taking a photo of is going to be a silhouette. So what you can do is point the camera at, say, your beach towel. Hold this black button down, and then lift your camera up to take the photo of the person you're with, as long as you keep holding that, and then take your picture. And what will happen is that your camera will remember the shutter speed and aperture of the beach towel when it takes the photo of the person you're with, and then the person you're with will be in focus. In properly exposed, and the back will be blown out, but the important part of the photo will be properly exposed. Another way to do that is with this silver button right here, which automatically adds 2 stops of light when you take a photo. So the black one here remembers your exposure settings as long as you hold it. The silver one adds 2 stops of light so that when you are in that same setting, you could just hold the silver button instead. 2 different buttons that do very similar things. This is the depth of field preview switch right here. You can see right in there that red dot's visible now. And what this does is this stops down the aperture. I'll show you in a second. To use it, you just have to push it in until you can see this silver button right here. And when you're done, push the silver button and it will close. So let me set the lens here to a manual aperture. Got to advance the film. Already did. Okay, good. Now with this set here, I've got it at f11. You should be able to see the aperture stop down as I push this in. There we go. Okay. Flash PC socket right here. You can connect a flash cable to that socket to have it mounted off of your camera. On the camera's bottom, we have a few different things. Over here, we have the mechanical coupling for your film advance motor winder right here. If you don't have this cover, it's a good idea to buy one so that you don't get dust and dirt into your camera, which can cause the mechanisms to get gunked up and not work. Film rewind button, tripod socket. These are the electronic contacts for your motor drive right here. Canon Japan to indicate who made it and where. On the camera's back, we have a few things. Here we have the viewfinder. And if you look on top of the viewfinder, you might see some grooves there. Those are used to hold some optional accessories, like an eye cup, for instance, was a popular one. Film memo holder. So when I had the Acros box top in here before, when you pull your 35mm film out of the box, you tear that tag off and slide it in through the top here. And then you'll know what kind of film you have, black and white, your ISO, and your exposure count, so that you know what you're shooting. So while we're here, let's take a look at the inside of the camera. To get into the camera, you lift the film rewind knob up until the back pops open. And here we are inside the camera. Film cassette chamber, and I'll show you in the second video how to use this to load your film. These 4 silver guide rails here are film guide rails. The outer 2, which are sort of partial guide rails, keep the film from moving up and down as it travels through the camera. The inner 2 allow the film to be pressed flat inside of the camera. And what happens is that the sprocket holes are over the silver guide rails there, and you can see how this is between those outer ones and it doesn't want to move up and down now. The film pressure plate, which we'll see in just a second, sandwiches up against here to keep this film pressed flat so that the light from the lens is properly focused on it. Here we have the film tension sprocket, and what this does is this pulls this keeps tension on the film, so it spins. As you advance the film, you can see it spinning here to pull the film through the back of the camera. This also keeps tension on the film so that it doesn't move backwards. Plastic over time develops a memory, which is why this film is curling, right? And so if you imagine having 36 frames of memory-laden, really curly film over here, it wants to pull that film back into the cassette over here. This sprocket keeps it from doing that. You have to release the sprocket to spin backwards when you rewind the film by pushing this button in, which we'll see in the second video. Film take-up spool right here. When we load film in the second video, I'll show you how to load your film in here so that the film can advance through the camera. On the camera's door, we have this roller here, which is a guide roller that helps keep tension on the film here so that it advances properly. The film pressure plate that we mentioned, and this cassette retaining spring keeps the film cassette properly aligned so that the film exits the cassette properly during use. Now, a neat trick with this camera is there's a little silver lever here, and you can push it downward, and now you can take the door off. And this was used to put things like a data back on the back of the camera. The data backs for these, by the way, are not worthwhile anymore because they have aged out of how high they can count. They couldn't count until the year 9999. I think they went up to 2006, I think. The point of that is don't bother getting the data back. It's big, it's heavy, it doesn't do you any good. We can, however, take this off, and you can see how everything sort of lines up when you have the back of the camera closed. The sprocket goes right, or the roller goes right here to keep the tension on the sprocket right here with the sprocket holes on your film. Film pressure plate lines up here. Film cassette spring lines up right here. I have a boatload of tips for you on how to use this camera and make the most of it. This camera can accept 3 different motor mounts, the A, the A2, and the MA. All 3 of them will work with this camera. So if you really want to get a motor advance for this camera, just go up to your favorite, everyone's favorite, the only real online auction website, and just search for those 3, or go to a camera shop and look for those 3, the A, the A2, and the MA. They can all work. The difference between those is the number of batteries and the film advance speed. I don't have the specs written down, so if you're interested in that, it's pretty easy to find that info online. The AE-1 program borrowed some manufacturing technology from the new F1 camera, and what that did was help improve some aspects of this camera's performance, the viewfinder brightness being one that I found consistently discussed online over and over again. Most likely, that's the one that's most outward facing, and some of the other manufacturing improvements had to do with build quality and internal components and things like that. And I would guess, just conjecture here, that some of the parts in here would be swappable with the new FN, not any you can really benefit from, but some of those internal parts may be swappable or easily adapted from one or the other, just so that an economy of scale would make the new F1 less expensive to produce by using some of the components that go into the AE-1 program, which would have been a much higher volume camera. That's how I would have done it anyway. Okay, onward. The AE-1 program accepts more system accessories than any other A-series camera. That includes the A1. This can accept way more system accessories. I don't know why that is. Just an interesting fact I found online. The AE-1 debuted at a cheaper price than the brand new AE-1 Original. So when this came out, the AE-1 program was selling for less money than the older AE-1 cameras that were being sold as new. And that's because the and that had to do with some import duty issues, as well as also this having a few more plastic components, which would have made it less expensive to produce. The viewfinder LEDs in here, if you look through your camera right now, you'll see some LEDs in the viewfinder for the light meter. The brightness of those adjusts to the light coming into the lens, so the LEDs always appear to be the same brightness when you use this camera. That's a very nice touch, by the way, and it's also really subtle. I didn't even notice this camera did that until I read that, and you know what? That's good engineering. The Canon AE-1 programs are susceptible to the Canon squeak. Okay, I don't have a Canon that I can demonstrate that with, but if you push the shutter button and it sounds like you were wearing flip-flops and stepped on a rat, that's the Canon squeak. And basically what it means is that there are some gears on this side of the camera behind the battery chamber where the lubricating oil has either gotten thick and gummy or has gone away with time. There are some really good videos. I think the Fix Old Camera channel has one that shows how to fix that. Basically, you just take the bottom plate off of the camera. You grab a needle oiler with some light sewing machine oil. I have done this repair 200-300 times. And then you just put it in here, put a drop or two of oil. You take the cap off first, of course, but then you put a drop or two of oil in here, and it should stop squeaking pretty quickly. If it doesn't, you let it sit overnight, and it should by that point, or you try again. But you put the needle in 31, 32 millimeters and bend the tip a little bit, and it's just fine. So anyway, check out those videos on how to do it. It's a really easy fix. In general, the Canon squeal, by the way, does not affect your shutter speed timing or your exposures. However, when they get really, really bad, they can. So the mechanism in here, if without lubricating oil, can get very slow. And over the years, I saw some of these in the AE-1s, and I think, yeah, the A1s to a lesser extent, but these in the AE-1s with a very bad Canon squeal, where I'd push the shutter button, and then it would wait for a second like it was thinking, and then the mirror would pop up and the squeal would happen, and then the mirror timing and the shutter timing were sometimes out of sync because of it. So if your camera has this squeal, the point of that is get it taken care of, because the problem doesn't get better. It only gets louder and makes your camera worse. One other thing is that if your AE-1 program has the date code imprinted in the back, there's a link in this video's description to a guide on how to interpret those date codes, and that can tell you when and where your camera was made. So let me open up the back here, and I will tell you it's right here on the flat part of the cassette chamber. I'm not sure if you can see it. I definitely don't expect you to be able to read that, but it says FA0335. The F stands for Fukushima, and I forget how the rest of it's broken down, but basically this was made at the Fukushima factory in March of 1986 is what this is saying. I also have some things you should not do with your camera. The first is don't store your camera in a plastic bag or box unless you have a good rechargeable desiccant pack. Not the kind of desiccant pack that comes out of the leather jacket that you just bought at Goodwill or something like that because the former owner forgot to get rid of the desiccant pack themselves. What I mean is a legit rechargeable desiccant pack, the kind you throw in the oven when it turns a certain color, and then after it cools back down, you put it back in the bag or box. And the reason for that is that plastic is moisture permeable. And once moisture gets in, it's sort of like an insect. It's a genius at getting into your house, completely inept at getting out. So once the moisture gets into that plastic bag or box, it's going to get into the leather covering of the camera, into your lens optics, your viewfinder optics, and that will cause fungus to grow and could also make your camera stink of mildew. Both of those are very bad situations. So if you have a plastic bag or box, you keep this in. There's nothing wrong with that if you also put a desiccant pack in it. The next tip that I have for you is don't touch the shutter or the mirror. So if we take the lens off here, that's the mirror. You don't want to touch it because your finger oils can tarnish it, which can affect your ability to focus and also affect your meter, because your meter's in the prism up here and it needs the light bouncing off that mirror to meter properly. Let's see if I actually got that correct or if I'm mistaken about that. Yeah, there's no meter down there underneath the mirror. Don't do what I just did, by the way. Don't do that. So that tells us that the meter is in fact in the prism. While I have this mirror up, which I shouldn't be doing anyway, don't do what I do. Do what I say. You can see the shutter curtain back there. You don't want to touch that shutter curtain because you could, if you push on it too hard, you could cause it to derail and you could brick your shutter. You could also put your finger through it. If it closes on your finger or something like that, that can cause it to jam. Those are just really good and creative ways to get yourself a $150 or more camera repair bill. Don't let your camera get wet. These are not weather sealed. And so if water gets into the electronics, it can cause a short, which will ruin your camera. And when the electronics go on this camera, or the AE-1 or any of the other A series cameras for that matter, they are no longer viable for repair because the electronic repair is so complex that it is way more expensive to do the electronics repair than just to buy a new one. I actually don't know any repairman who will repair the will repair a camera that has dead electronics. If you're lucky, they'll swap the serial number onto a working camera for you. Don't store your Canon AE-1 program in your car. There are 3 reasons. The heat can cause the lubricating oils in your lenses and your camera to get very, very thin and get to places they shouldn't be. Then when it gets back to its normal temperature and those lubricating oils get to their normal viscosity, things stop working properly, especially the aperture in your lens. If it's in the winter and it's very cold, those lubricating oils can get thick and gummy and break down. And now they're not the right viscosity and things will not work properly. And the last thing is, cameras will always be a theft target. So even if you're just running into the gas station to give the attendant a $20 bill so you can put enough gas in the tank to get, the next 6 miles or whatever gas costs now, then take your camera with you because you don't want to come back out to a broken window and no camera. And just remember that your Canon AE-1 program is a precision tool that should be handled with care and respect. And as long as you take care of your camera will take care of you. Thank you all very much for watching this first video. In the second video, we're going to go through everything on this camera and talk about how to use it to take your photos.